Nintendo's annual general meeting was held at the end of last week, and already some headlines have leaked pertaining to the question and answer session from the investor conference. As usual, I'd like to wait on Nintendo's official translations, but there are a few things which have gone onto Nintendo's investor relations site over the last few days that I think are worth scrutinizing, including updates on their shareholders, their direct compensation, some company statistics, and the way the directors are being lined up and more. Much of this falls under the corporate governance report. This annual report is largely unchanged from last year, with minor amendments reflecting changes to the numbers of outside directors and statistics that they are required to report on. Some of these are less drastic than others. For example, the proportion of women in managerial posts at NCL, that's Nintendo Company Limited in Japan, has gone from 5.1% to 5.8%, possibly, I wonder, reflecting Risa Tabata's elevation to Kensuke Tanabe's former role, since I don't imagine that there are all that many managers, and indeed, as worded, it could just be that some of the more junior women have left the company, causing the percentages to adjust. The number of women in management positions elsewhere is also fairly stable. In terms of their major shareholders, the chief names are largely unchanged, although generally the shareholders have either maintained their same share amount or subtly divested. Of course, some of these investors are a little opaque. Note that there are two separate investment portfolios from JP Morgan who have invested in Nintendo quite heavily, and you can bet that there are other groups that don't qualify as major shareholders, but that also come from some of these institutional investors. One interesting new appearance, though, is GIC, the Singaporean Sovereign Wealth Fund. Given Nintendo's level of investment recently in Singapore, with both their new Singapore branch and their takeover of Bandai Namco's Singapore-based studio, it seems like there is some level of reciprocation here. There are also other small additions, such as an extra bit of explanation about Illumination chief Chris Maledondra's role as a director, and how the increasing importance of the video and movie business to Nintendo has increased their reliance on Maledondri as an advisor. There's also a new blurb on the new director, Chika Saka, but it's just a standard recitation of her background and experience. Director compensation is another matter. The formula used to calculate this hasn't much changed, but the headline numbers surely have. They apply a formula which is essentially that the directors share 0.3% of the consolidated operating profit in accordance with their share of director points, which seems to be attributed to their position within the company, up to a maximum of 880 million yen across all of the directors, which is about $5 million. That means, in theory, with 13 or 14 directors, albeit with different numbers of points, performance-based compensation is going to be kept relatively restrained, although clearly that's just for one part of the overall compensation for these directors. As we see, therefore, the fixed compensation is 227 million yen, up 5.5% from last year's 250 million yen, but this time for 9 people rather than 8, so effectively it's gone down. The fact that this seems to be a small difference suggests to me there's quite a range of different remuneration in fixed compensation at the director level, and we'll see more evidence of this in a second. Performance-based compensation is up 27.5%, though, as would be expected given the November statements last year, but it's closer to a 13% increase when you adjust for the different numbers of directors that these figures account for. Overall, the Fantastic Four of Nintendo, whose remuneration is over 100 million yen, are Shuntaro Furukawa, the company president, at, and I'll use today's equivalent in dollar amounts for comparison purposes, 380 million yen, or just shy of $2 million, a 21% bump from last year. Shigeru Miyamoto at 246 million yen, or just over $1.5 million, which is a 19% bump from last year. Shinya Takahashi, the head of EPD, at 186 million yen, or a shade over $1.1 million. That's 27% up from last year, which seems fair enough given the importance of the emerging game lineup to the hopeful success of Switch 2. And Shibata at 164 million yen, whose remuneration is up 58%, although note that he is also now the CEO of Nintendo of America, and this expanded role probably accounts to a large degree for why the significant increase in his compensation. In dollar terms, he's now just over the $1 million mark. Obviously, these are very substantial sums. For comparison, in March 2024, 1,120 executives in the whole of Japan topped 100 million yen, and while I can't find more recent figures, I doubt the numbers are significantly more 2 years later. Last year, Furukawa was in the middle of the pack in terms of CEO compensation in Japan, but maybe even slightly towards the upper end, so now I guess by Japanese standards he's probably been pushed up quite a bit, although of course compared to, let's say, the $30 million compensation of EA's Andrew Wilson in 2025, it seems like his remuneration is positively modest. While all this isn't new, Nintendo always do a skills matrix. I'm not sure I've shared it before, and I do think it's quite interesting to put on the screen, so here we go. We can see different qualities that they value, with institutional knowledge being the first of the key things that they look for with their directors, and you can see how they balance in their team of directors differing capabilities. One thing I find quite interesting is that Kazuhiko Hachiya is given a skill set under software production and IP creation. Hachiya's appointment in 2025 as an outside director raised eyebrows, as he's a media artist in Japan who has been long-term friends with Shigeru Miyamoto. While the designation of software production and IP creation is quite broad, Maladandra is also given a splodge here because he's so involved with Nintendo's IP empire through the films. It does make me wonder what Hachiya is actually doing and whether it could be more closely linked to the games front in the future. Probably not, but it'll be interesting to see. Additionally, we should also highlight this short announcement entitled Company View Regarding Stock Trading Unit Reduction. This relates to their initiative to reduce the minimum trading unit of shares so that, in essence, smaller retail investors can invest in Nintendo. This seems to be following their 2022 stock split, where they essentially said that each unit of stock was now worth 10 units. Having a broadened base of investors like this has several advantages: widening ownership, creating potentially more stability and visibility for the company if many smaller investors hold stock, particularly in Japan, where they will want to have a secure base and a strong following. This also chimes with a release confirming that Treasury stock has been allocated to directors, although it should be noted that these are stocks already owned by Nintendo, and there are rules around their disposal, meaning they can't be cashed in while a director. Although there's a lot made of it here, in line with the rules of disclosure under the Tokyo Stock Exchange, 44,500 shares is actually a tiny amount in the scheme of things, so I think this is not a particularly significant change, although of course very nice for the directors in question. Most of this is fairly inside baseball and unlikely to have any real impact on the company. Basically, the company had a very good year in 2025 to 26, partly because the Switch 2 was more successful out of the gate than expected, and partly as a result of the company's many contingencies in case of a bumpy console transition no longer being necessary, so they ended up with an excess of funds. Of course, the pendulum can, and surely will in due course, swing the other way, but for the financial year they're tying a bow on right now, things went very well indeed, and I think this information reflects this. In due course, I expect there'll be a lot more on Nintendo's website for the meeting. Last year, it was a few days before the Q&A was published and a week before the annual general meeting document launched. At any rate, though, that's it from this video, but please do check out the Patreon for early ad-free and exclusive content. Thanks for watching as ever, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.